This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and my guest today is Oliver B. Libby, a civic entrepreneur, investor, and co-founder of HL Ventures and the Resolution Project. Through his work, he helps values-driven leaders turn big ideas into lasting impact. His new book, Strong Floor, No Ceiling, Building a New Foundation for the American Dream, lays out a bold but practical roadmap to rebuild opportunity in America through what he calls radical moderation. Oliver Libby, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Great to see you, Joe, and thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So it's funny, your book is a sort of political book, but also a business book. And Oliver, you probably know people like this, and I know plenty that if you're in a room with business people and you're shooting the shit about politics, and someone walks in, they're like, hey, what are you guys talking about? Oh, we're just talking about the debate last night. They will like literally do a roadrunner, burst out of the room. You see their smoke like behind their feet kind of thing. Like people in the world of business, it's very third railish to talk about politics and business. What gave you the inspiration to not, and again, not that this is like a full scale political book, but you go into areas that most business books do not go into. What made you want to take that and, pardon the word, risk to do so?
Yeah. So first of all, you're totally right? But I always tell people that you can ignore politics, but politics doesn't ignore you. And in business, that's never more true than nowadays, where everything is crossed. We see what happens when you get either policy from the White House or from a state or whatever. You know, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It matters to you as a citizen and as a business owner, as an investor. These things are really intertwined. I've had the privilege, Joe, of working in all the sectors, right? So I started my career in the national security world, in the federal government. I've always been around government policy. I went to the private sector because I felt it was really important to understand the engine of what powers our country, which is our capitalist economy that we have and these businesses that we run and invest in. I started a nonprofit. My family were in the healthcare space. So all these threads tie up to me. And I've been thinking to myself, gee, I wish someone would write a book about the things we would need in our society to re-unlock the American dream for people. And I kept waiting for someone else to do it, and no one else did. And so as an investor and a business owner, I thought this better work for us. It's really important to us. And why not take my perspective and bring that to the conversation?
Very nice. Now, I've been around the block a few times as a card-carrying Gen Xer, and it is odd to sort of put this time and place that we're living now in context with every other time and place, because there has been that very much strong divide between all of the things you listed off. But now those walls are gone. I mean, you talk about healthcare, you talk about investing, you talk about capital, all of that stuff is just a big it's a whole big ugly jambalaya. So how do you navigate that? The fact that you can't avoid it. Like you said, you cannot avoid it. But again, we don't have the training for this. we were not prepared for this time and place that we're at.
Well, first of all, the fact that we used to do more training in this. More people really like weaved, civics and understanding the polity, if you will, into their upbringing, into, the kind of the breakfast cereal, right? And that happens less. But look, our country has actually done more to intertwine these things than many. I mean, let me give you an example. We run healthcare largely through business here. I mean, when you stop to think about it, and I love these things, and you'll find them in the book frequently, it's just like spelunking back to figure out, like, why is this the way it is? I remember actually I have a friend, a senior executive at one of the big auto companies in the 2008 crisis. And I remember he very famously said, our company ended up being a healthcare and pension company that made cars on the side. Why is that a good idea? Like, as a business owner, I worry about our payroll and our healthcare costs. And I also wonder, why I'm glad that we provide healthcare to our workers, but why is that on me to do? And isn't it a good investment for our society? So, you know what I mean? Your question's a really good one, but we have intertwined this stuff more tightly in America. The sectors cross more profoundly in America than almost anywhere else. So we ought to understand that.
Wow. All right. And in the book you write about, and you describe your philosophy as radically moderate. The first part of it, radical, has been thrown around a lot. for both parties. But for you to actually to be radically in the middle is makes you a bit of an odd duck, Oliver, because as you know, the algorithm does not appreciate down the middle. The algorithm does not appreciate finding a middle ground. The algorithm likes to find those radical lefts and rights and then feeds it to us. How do you suppose? I mean, obviously the book is part of it, but how do you get your philosophy and message across in a world where the system is not built for Oliver Libby's out there?
Radical moderation is part of that, Joe. Like, I got so sick. Look, so many people that I talk to, and I bet you the same, are out there mostly moderate about most things, but there are some big misconceptions. There's a sense that when someone is a moderate, they're moderate about everything, like every single fader is in the middle. That's not true. Most people are like very reasonable about most things, and then there's something, it's gun control or it's abortion or it's, you know, the state of Israel or whatever, right? That like super radicalizes them. And so moderates aren't usually boring. They're not completely homogenous, and they don't all vote the same way, and they can't all be voted on, they're counted on to do that in the same, just kind of automatically. What's interesting, and you're right about this, is the algorithm therefore thinks of this group as kind of boring and milquetoast and like not that cool. And the fringes are loud, and they're often very skilled at social media. And look, hats off to the hustle, but the majority of Americans don't want the fringes to lead. And so the question is, well, why do we cede the ground on being interesting to people whose views are nuts? And the answer is because that's what the algorithm wants. And so I thought to myself, yeah, the term radical is fraught, but it's actually powerful. It is radical to think that moderates can have the solution, that we could be heard. And it's not that every solution in the book is the milquetoast middle. I actually try and take the best ideas from the right and the left. I mean, I'll give you just one example of this. You know, we talk a lot about the fact that prescription drugs are out of control expensive, and they are, right? I mean, just an oncology prescription drug that might cost $100,000 a month for someone. And we have insurance that often pays for that. Sometimes it doesn't, with terrible consequences. So the question is, how do we get that under control? And one big solution would be let Medicare and Medicaid compete on the open market to lower the price. But here's the thing. I'm an investor. I've been invested in healthcare companies before, and we want also America to be the font of medical innovation. I mean, it's one of the great crown jewels of our economy that we invent the best medicines and we have all these amazing trials that keep people alive. And you can't legitimately go to the big companies that invest billions of dollars to do that and say, hey, we're just going to drive the prices down. Good luck innovating now. So what's an unlock there? It's the patent life. They're in a race to monetize these medicines in time for the patents to run out. So here's a radical, moderate solution. Drive the prices down using Medicare and Medicaid, but extend the patent life so these companies actually have an IRR on their investment. It's not boring, but it's taking the best from both sides and putting together something sensible that ought to work.
Interesting. That's a great take. And it's funny how you put the nuance into the word moderate, because I think many people would probably claim to be moderate, but we don't know what that means. We think moderate is like, oh, you're not you're not a radical left, you're not a radical right, you're in the middle. And so that pie is rather large. But in the way you describe the radical moderate, it's almost like a minority where you lose the nuance. Like if you assume radical moderate, oh, I'm moderate about everything across the board. Just like when minorities vote, they're like, oh, all blacks and Latinos will vote Democrat because that's how they've historically done it. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, they don't. Because I have my liberal friends who are like, they know that I come from a Spanish background. My entire family is Latino. And they'll like jokingly say, like, I don't understand how Latinos could vote for Donald Trump, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, like, because Latinos are not one person. They are not a monolith that thinks all the same way. And it's funny how the way you describe being a radical moderate is much how many of Americans take minorities and certain sections of our population. They all assume everyone thinks the same way. But again, it goes back to same team, same mentality. Like, how do we break from that, Oliver? That's the one thing that scares me. It's like, especially we are recording this during the government shutdown, and hopefully by the time we publish this episode, it's done. But the fact that and I wrote about this not too long ago, Oliver, about the politics is run by, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And I've always thought, what if we gave an inch? We would be one step closer to an agreement. So tell me about this world we live in where people are afraid to stray from their camps because then they will be seen as the enemy or they'll be seen as losing. Tell me about that.
Well, put very simply, it's not going to work much longer. And look, I've been a student of history my whole life. I love that work. And history is very clear on what happens when societies become paralyzed. It's interesting because it's not partisan. We've been partisan forever, and partisanship is a part of almost any polity, and that's a healthy competition for ideas. The problem is paralysis, and we are in paralysis. And the fact that we can't even get the leaders right now to sit down in a room and talk this stuff through is nuts. And look, I think both sides bear a lot of blame for this, but I will say, like, we also have to have a conversation about real things. There is no major constituency in America that thinks that the Affordable Care Act should be applied to illegal immigrants. What's actually even more ironic about that is that the healthcare for illegal immigrants that actually get really sick is still covered by the public. We just do it because doctors don't check your papers when they cure your heart attack.
Right. Because we're humans. It's a good thing.
And by the way, that as it should be, like, I don't want, my dad's a doctor. I wouldn't want him being like, I'm sorry, do you have a passport? You know, before we give you that, like, no, it's nuts. Right. And so we're not that as a society. But look, to your question, right? Like, I believe no party should ever rely on reliable voters that they don't have to care about because they're always going to come out for them. We should win the battle of ideas. Whichever party you're a part of should win the battle of ideas. Every election cycle should earn people's sensible votes. And look, that does require some things. If it's a little strange, right? But in Strong Floor, No Ceiling, the whole second body chapter is devoted to some things I think need to be in place if we're going to be successful getting on the same page about all the policy things we talk about afterwards. And those things are some sort of a shared national experience. It's not all like military service in the draft, but there needs to be something we do after high school, I think. And there's a lot of more people coming to this idea and liking it. That's, you know, military service, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, teaching, work in local government, or maybe building infrastructure, but something that mixes us all up again. You know, that generation that came back from World War II, and I'm not recommending a war, but like that experience of all being there, doing that thing together meant that we've all seen the movie, right? The you know, Jewish guy from Brooklyn who's in the same unit as a guy from Tennessee who is a farmer, and then they come out, what are you going to do after the war? And then they run into each other 20 years later, and there's an element of shared experience, something that they share together. We need that. Number two, we need to get the information ecosystem in some kind of place where facts and reality matter. Once again, if we don't do that, like, democracy depends on reasonable information. If we don't have reasonable information, you can't expect it to generate reasonable votes, right? And last but not least, there are certain operational aspects of our democracy that are broken. Gerrymandering is bullshit, and money in politics is out of control. And again, we want this democratic experiment to work. We have to tweak these dials to get it back into a place where people's voice matters. And by the way, where your vote is therefore not counted on and assumed, but earned, and where it matters in every district.
Yeah. Oh, that's great stuff. And, you know, I'm most often accused of oversimplifying things, but a reason is, and you mentioned the fact that people knowing what their votes are. I think the problem is our elected officials' jobs, whether it's Congress people, senators, it's too good of a job, and they don't want to give it up. And they know how the game is played. They know if they live in a blue district, they don't have to appeal to the red voters, and vice versa. And so, and as Scott Galloway talks about this a lot, about like, let's pay our elected officials more so they maybe don't have to be basically prisoners to PACs and to lobbyists and stuff like that. So can we not make these jobs so good that they'll do anything to keep it? Because I think that's what, it's almost like a survival job for these folks. Like, they will do whatever it takes to keep that job. Hence, we get into everything you just mentioned in terms of like the warts and all of the current state of the American political landscape.
Yeah. But, you know, there's a weird thing here. It's like too good of a bad job, right? I mean, here's it. You know, I tell this story in the book. A person I respect a lot, Steve Israel, who was a congressman in New York, was the chairman of the DCCC, which is the organization that helps elect congressmen, you know, if you're a Democrat. And he used to raise a ton of money. And he resigned from Congress. He was at the height of his powers, you might argue. And he wrote this letter, and it's worth reading if y'all can find it, where he just talks about the fact that basically like 70% of his time was fundraising. He would like get on a plane. There was, you know, all those text messages. If you ever given to one politician, suddenly it's like, we need $7 or the world is over. And it's like, oh my God, like, and that became his job. Like, doing policy was the second. And so, number one, Scott Galloway's right. Like, this is not a good enough job for like really talented people to make a really good living for their families. Number two, we murder by the way, sorry, I hate to use that term, but like, because political violence is on the increase, but people really fear for their safety, both reputationally and now also physically serving in office. But then on the other hand, you're right. It's kind of a sinecure. Most of these seats are safe. And so it's like a really good, bad job. This does not work for the nation. We need really quality people to come in, spend some time in public service. You know, for me, I've always wanted to run for office, but my grandfather sat me down when I was like 20 years old. And he said, go do something first, learn something, employ some people, get married, pay some taxes, you know, deal with schools, right, for your kids. And then and only then might you be ready to reasonably represent people. And so I've been doing things in my life, and I may well run for office in the future, but it shouldn't be anyone's lifetime job.
Yeah, no, good stuff. And lastly, so I'm, as you can tell, I'm an obnoxious New Yorker. I live now in Charleston, South Carolina. I like to joke it's the little blue dot in a big red state. But there are signs where you'll see like political races in South Carolina where you're like, oh, this Democrat blank, whatever they're running for, they seem like they have good ideas, blah, blah, blah. And then November rolls around and they get absolutely destroyed because there's no chance in hell that a D will win in our state. You know, it's and I'm not saying just for South Carolina. My home state of New Jersey, same way. There are certain parts of New Jersey. If you're a D, you're not in our state, in our area, you're not going to get it. What can we? I mean, is there anything can be done about that? Like the fact that nothing will ever change in many of these states. I mean, a lot of people will say things in blue cities are broken. Things in our states are broken. I mean, you talk about the crime in blue cities, but then you also talk about the education rates in red states. Like there's bad in all of this that we're breaking down. But the fact that people wouldn't even in a million years vote for that other letter is another part of it where it's like, and it could all stem from what we've been talking about for the last 15 minutes, Oliver. It could be just a result of that. But like, man, it almost seems like nothing will ever actually, like we'll get minor improvements, but we won't see big improvements if we're not willing to possibly like, hey, this Republican candidate in New York, maybe they're a good fit, or maybe this Democratic candidate in South Carolina, they could be a good fit. Is there any way around that?
I think there is. It's why I wrote the book. And I don't mean to suggest that it's guaranteed, and I don't mean to suggest that it's easy. But look, if you look at American history, like actually these things do ebb and flow. Famously, Lyndon Johnson was really depressed after the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act passed, and his chief of staff asked him, why are you down? And he said, well, because I've lost the South for the Democratic Party for the rest of my life and most of yours. And he was right. But that was the conservative wing of the Democratic Party, and it went away. And so people who had been lifelong Democrats ceased to be so. So these things can change. But maybe a more hopeful thought is strong floor, no ceiling is something that I did not write for Democrats or for Republicans. It's actually more for people who have the same questions you're asking me. They're adrift. They're wondering, like, when is there going to be good sense? Like, we have a country to run here. And I have always told people who are willing to listen to me that we fail as a nation when we lose our faith in our central ideals, the American dream. The fact that 27% of people think that that's real anymore is a disaster for our country. It's not going to be 9/11 or Pearl Harbor. That's a country killer. And number two, when we also lazily assume that everything is going to be okay. We have to work for that. We have to believe in something as a country. And so I'm trying to offer something we can get behind in strong floor, no ceiling, and offer it to anyone. If Donald Trump wants to talk about that, and by the way, a lot of what he talked about on the campaign trail is about strong floor, no ceiling. The policies may be a little less so. If Hakeem Jeffries wants to continue to mention that on CNN every time he's on, great. This is something I'm trying to provide for the American people to find a place where we can go forward. But I will tell you, just in the simplest answer to your question, I think it can be done. It better be able to be done, because what we're doing now is not going to work.
Yeah. You mentioned the American dream, and you write about in the book about how it has faded. You just rolled off some stats there. And, it's funny, even though I host business podcasts, I often say that capitalism is the best ism. Like, we've tried the other ones. They don't work. Capitalism is the best. But when I think capitalism was created, I don't think they ever envisioned this much wealth. And it's become so top-heavy capitalism that I think if you went back and talked to the founding fathers who kind of like wrapped their arms around capitalism, like, hey, one day there's going to be someone that's going to be worth more than the entirety of the planet. They'll be like, oh, no, of course not. Then we won't do this if that's the way it's going to be. So this divide is great, and this is not just an American problem. This is all. I mean, Korea has it. I mean, there are countries all over the world where you have this big divide between the rich and the poor, and I think that's where you get that sort of ripple effect of why people think the American dream is hopeless, because they see these people that are ultra wealthy, and then they see the ultra poor. And me growing up in the '80s, where the middle class was such a thriving part of America, since the baby boom of the '50s and '60s. But like, we're seeing that middle class erode. And I think that's where the American dream lives. The American dream certainly doesn't always live between the rich and the poor. It's like that middle lane. So tell me about your take on the American dream.
Yeah, look, the American dream is people grow up with different religions, but the American dream is the altar on which we worship as American citizens, right? Like, that's the thing that knits us all together, whether you were born here, whether you came here over the seas. The American dream, the ability to improve your lot and leave your children better off than you. This is the American thing. And the fact that so few people believe it's possible, or maybe ever was, is a national tragedy and a national sickness that will kill us more surely than anything. But here's the deal. Strong floor, no ceiling is about what you're talking about. I actually don't think that great wealth in and of itself is either intrinsically good or bad. But if you have a situation where you have separated the poorest part of society from the richest part to an extraordinary degree, and where almost everybody is struggling. I mean, I tell people this all the time. That statistic that many people have heard but not internalized, about that like half of American families have $400 of breathing room in their bank account, paycheck to paycheck, isn't even true because they're in debt to do that. You cannot square that against a $1,200 steak dinner for a business dinner in New York. Like, those realities don't intersect, and that is a national disaster. So when I say strong floor, this is a capitalist investment. A strong floor means that we have a better educated, healthier, more housed and employed population whose talents and dollars are in service of the economy as well as the nation, and who have a pathway into that middle class. That the fatter it is, the better our country does and the better the economy does. Because, by the way, if you can then be an entrepreneur who creates a multi-billion-dollar company, that should be okay, as long as you're playing by the rules and you're paying into the system, right? You having great wealth and yachts and planes and stuff, I have no problem with that. The problem is when you have that, and then when you have the rest of society destitute. And look, we're going to test this in a big way as AI and robotics nexus shows up, because the concentration of wealth, if we think it's bad now, it's about to get crazy. And we are going to have to be very thoughtful as a society, because with 350 million people here and 9 billion people in the world, there is one guarantee in history, which is when the divergence is this bad, it's either a reset or it's violence. And none of that is good for business.
Yeah. It's so funny. I know people talk about this political divide, and I want to double click. I don't think rich people are bad. I think we need rich people, and they're as aspirational. But when that divide gets so great that you're talking about, it gets more into politics. Doesn't really matter, because one of the things I talk about when it comes to, like, you mentioned pro-choice, pro-life later. Like, if you're a pro-life rich person, right, and you live in a state that you can't get an abortion, if your daughter gets pregnant, they could just get on a plane and fly somewhere else. You know what I mean? And then obviously, you get into morals of it all, but that's what I mean. Like, that's where the money part plays in, where the poor people are going to be like, wait a minute. So I won't be able to do X, Y, and Z, whatever you're able to do because of your wealth, but I'm stuck in it because you supported a candidate that's going to do this. So I think that's where that divide is just, it's just, like you said, it's the scary part, where it becomes sort of like, the French Revolution all over again. It's where it's like people will wake up one day like, this isn't what we signed up for. This is not what the American dream was my parents talked about.
Yeah, by the way, like, I know this makes me a huge nerd, but one of my favorite periods in history is the end of the Roman Republic. And if I like redacted the names and updated the language, you would not be able to tell the news apart. It is astonishing how much this rhymes with what's going on there. And look, it doesn't need to go bad. I'm an optimist. I wrote this book not because I want to just like write a book that eventually, people are like trying to figure out how to read, but I believe it can be fixed. But boy, do we have challenges, and you're putting your finger on one of the great ones. And look, again, I emphasize, like, having a healthy society where people are not like destitute on the sidewalk, like, that is good for business. It's good for wealth generation. It's good for capitalism. Like, but capitalism, we just have to decide as a society, like, do we like capitalism because it's the best system to provide the society that we all want, that we all kind of shake hands tacitly and say we're all going to be part of this organization together? Or is it just intrinsically like something we just want to like run? And I don't believe that. Like, we have capitalism because it serves humans, and it does it well, in my opinion, most of the time. It's not just like an inherent idea that just needs to run to the nth degree. And by the way, a big problem is the amount of money that's in politics, because when you feel like the oligarchs have bought the election, now it's even harder to feel your voice is heard, and that is not good for the system either.
Yeah, and obviously radical moderate is your thing, but and I think sometimes radical ideas, it's what it takes to get us out of it. And I'd love to get your take on this. Universal basic income. Rucker Rucker Bregman, the Dutch historian, writes about this all the time. And the idea is like everyone, no matter what, gets an X amount of dollars to as essentially like almost like they get a check every couple weeks as for everyone to make the same amount of money, like a floor, like like you've talked about. And if you read any of Rucker Bregman's books, he'll talk about that. Richard Nixon was one of the people that the early of like, it's not a bad idea. And if for the non-history person, Richard Nixon is a famous Republican who also, like, I believe was the one who brought the Clean Air Act into existence. So I think it was a different time back then. But this idea of universal basic income, a radical idea, but do you think that's something that could be part of the solution to sort of decrease that gap?
So universal basic income is, first of all, there are small examples of it working actually rather well. And it doesn't need to be the source of all income for people. I actually am skeptical of it working if all the rest of the system is the same as it is today. So if we don't make any other major changes, there's no like massive upheaval. We're just like, someone just says like, hey, by the way, the government's going to send you another $1,000 a month. Like, we did a little bit of that during COVID. It got a little out of control. It's hard to do. Where I become friendlier to the idea, and I actually talk about this at length in the book as what I call the American technology prosperity dividend, is if the nexus between AI and robotics, and it is the two things, as AI does, thinking, content, etc., and robotics does physical labor. But if we get AI powered robots and we really start to put like massive numbers of people out of work at a societal level, I think that's what that shift then says, okay, well, maybe we're going to be doing something else as humans. And by the way, if you read like some of the founding fathers of modern capitalism, like a Keynes, they talk about leisure. We're supposed to work less as efficiency gets us gains, right? Except for the fact that ain't working very well because we're concentrating the gains right now. So people aren't working less. They're working 5 jobs and they've got $400 in the bank. So at some point, if you get these massive upheavals, that will then also make an argument for the fact that maybe we can all go on TikTok and create content and do stuff that we think is funny and whatever. And at that point, maybe there is a more level playing field that the government helps support. By the way, huge science fiction fan, original series of Star Trek. How much money do you see in Star Trek? None.
Yeah. And I want to go into AI in a minute, but I want to something you mentioned about like if universal basic income existed, the other problems would still exist. And one of them you talk about in the book, and we kind of touched upon, is healthcare. Its biggest expense. It's one of the biggest drivers towards bankruptcy for people in the United States of America. So even if we had UBI, people would probably still be going broke because of these healthcare expenses. And we all know it's messed up. I know we've tried to patchwork it with the Affordable Care Act, and people have been threatening to replace it for a very long time, and nothing's come along the pike. But it's interesting in terms of like how the problem with healthcare that I see sometimes is the opaqueness. How you'll see studies of, if you go get a procedure done in a hospital on the 3rd floor, it's going to cost more than it costs on the 4th floor. Like there's these odd things because there's no way to value the price of something because everything has a different expense. So healthcare in Mississippi is going to cost a lot less than it costs in New York because of all the other things we know about the economy. So what's your take on trying to fix this, or at least improve it, so it's not a place where, God forbid, you get into a car accident and all of a sudden next day you're bankrupt because of medical expenses?
Yeah, there has never been a greater concentration of brilliant people working on like a dumber set of policies. I mean, this is a national tragedy. We spend something like 20 cents on the dollar of the whole economy, not the federal budget. The whole Megillah is spent on healthcare in America, and we're spending too much money. We're getting not good enough results. one of the things that I grew up around doctors. My grandfather, my great great uncle are both Nobel laureates. My parents are both doctors. I grew up in hospitals. I worked the front desk in my mom's office doing insurance claims, and I worked in the lab at my grandfather's Nobel winning laboratory at Harvard. So I really have seen the insides of this thing. I've been a patient. And when I hear Americans have the best healthcare in the world, that is just false. Wealthy Americans who live near a teaching hospital and get lucky do absolutely have the best healthcare in the world. Average Americans in an average place with an average hospital, crapshoot, right? And expensive crapshoot. And here's another one for you. We spend an enormous amount of money on acute care. So we don't take care of ourselves as a society. And by the way, it's one of the things I hate the anti-vaccine part of RFK Jr., but the nutrition part's actually pretty interesting, right? And this is one of those things where like you don't have to throw everything out. You don't have to have like derangement about it. You just like, okay, what works for me and what doesn't? Okay. So the nutrition part's interesting because when we present with a heart attack, it's expensive, right? It's nights at the hospital, it's stents, it's medications, it's doctors, stuff. Taking care of ourselves, maybe delay that or make it less worse. That's really important. So a few things we should do. There should be a single payer system. We chickened out on it during Obamacare. It should have had a single payer option, which does not mean everyone has the same healthcare. If you're wealthy and you can pay to go to the Mayo Clinic and be in a cool, cutting edge study, God bless you, right? But there should be a floor for healthcare. It's an investment in our society. This is crazy what we're doing right now. Number two, there should be tax credits and other incentives around preventative healthcare. If you can prove you've gone to a doctor just to keep yourself basically healthy and you're doing other basic steps for health, you should actually get like a reward for doing that for our society because it saves our society money. And then number three, we need to do those things without murdering the innovation pipeline in America because we are still, and by the way, big changes in the last 6 months, but we have to hang on for dear life to being the world's innovation center and biotechnology center. It's a massive advantage for our country and for our economy. If we do those things, there's a lot of other stuff we should do. We've got to make sure nurses, emergency room doctors, have a whole jobs of national priority plan as well that promotes those sorts of jobs. There's lots we need to do, but a single payer system, preventative care, making sure we're the innovation pipeline, making sure that people are working in this industry and being rewarded for doing so, that would go a long way to fixing what is a god-awful mess.
Good stuff. All right. So let's go back to AI robotics. And I want to sort of tie it into the early part of our conversation in terms of the divide in this country and the fact that AI robotics could actually make it worse because of the fact that most corporations, and I actually did a TikTok video the other day about this, like most corporations, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, not humanity. So sure, if it's going to make them more money to lay people off and have robotics, they are going to do that. Amazon famously has talked about the fact that they're going to reduce workforce with AI and robotics. And there was I think the head of HR of Amazon was on NBC News the other day, and they were asking questions about, what's this going to affect? And the reporter kept asking, will this change the Amazon workforce? And I guess the company line, they've got this company line, Oliver, you'll love this, is like, it will vary as we grow. They are so afraid to throw out there something like, oh yeah, it's going to change immensely. Oh yeah, we're going to, but so they know, they're very afraid of getting that messaging out there because they know what's going to happen if that does get out, that they're essentially going to be like, yeah, we don't need humans anymore. And then the people, and again, getting back to the divide of this country. So how do we bridge this gap of, yes, we should have AI, we should have robotics, but then what will that do to the workforce of this country? Like, what will they do if there are fewer jobs? How does that help anything? Is my question.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with everything you said. I see it coming too. And I think this time is different, which you can get in all sorts of trouble for predicting that. But I do think that the nexus of AI and robotics, that together is something that could, and look, we have choices, right? It's not just doom and gloom. We can decide that we're going to do some things with our society that do unlock that Keynesian leisure. Like, look, if you could tell everybody in America, like, you can get good healthcare, your kids will grow up, you'll have, we can work 2 days a week and you can do all sorts of other fun stuff and you can survive that way. Like, that may be not a bad deal, right? As long as we continue to add to the pie. And look, a really important part of this is the pie isn't fixed. Like, one thing about the succeeding technological revolutions we've had in human society is it increases the entire pie. It doesn't redivide it. And that does mean that when we concentrate a lot of the benefits of these technologies in a few companies, and it might be a historically few companies, that there is either some sort of dividend being paid by those companies who are going to make an untold amount of money, right? A historic amount of money, or from the government to help make up the difference. And if my friends who are techno optimists are right, and it's just like there will be more jobs, this will create industries we can't imagine, fine. But the disruptive time is still the disruptive time. I mean, we often refer back to the industrial revolution and say, hey, it worked out for folks. It was really hard for folks during the 20 to 40 years of the middle of that revolution, which is why we had so much social unrest and violence and revolution. So just whether it's a permanent change in the human condition or a temporary one that's really disruptive, either way, we as a society owe it to our citizens to take some actions to make that the best version of it that it can be.
Awesome. That's great. And so, anyone who's listening to our conversation, read your book, knows you love this country. And I always take folks behind the dedication of the book, and you dedicate it to your family, but you wrap up your dedication by saying, with love and deep thanks for this country, which has allowed my family to survive and thrive. I know this may sound very Pollyannish and very kind of like cheesy and sugary, but tell me about Oliver's love of America.
I think it's, first of all, one of the things that makes me angriest is when any party or group of people thinks that they own patriotism. I am deeply patriotic. This country opened its doors through a crazy story that we talk about in the book for my family that came here from various levels of various places where we were being threatened or massacred, and we were welcomed to the country. And that is something that no one can ever take away about the greatness of America. America saved my family's lives. And not only that, but when we got here, we had left everything. My grandparents had left everything behind, that they were able to rebuild a life for themselves, where my grandfather was able to do Nobel-winning research, and my parents were able to take care of people and advance the frontiers of human knowledge. That is a uniquely American story. That is amazing. And I do say at the beginning of the book, sometimes you have to have tough love for things that you love, just like our kids or our colleagues. You have to tell the truth. America has problems. I think anyone denying that is nuts. This idea of blind American exceptionalism, where love for country is equated with never criticizing the thing that you love, is just misguided. But the fact of the matter is, it's tough love, because America is the greatest country ever in history. We need to do it. We have a responsibility to it, to that dream, to everyone who's come before us, to take care of it. But it's an extraordinary place. And I hope Strong Floor, No Ceiling can make some small contribution to keeping it the greatest country in the history of the world.
Awesome. His name is Oliver B. Libby. The book, Strong Floor, No Ceiling, Building a New Foundation for the American Dream. Oliver, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Oliver and other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.